Hello and welcome to the EFN Presents episode review for Season 4, Episode 3, Castlemania. Joining me today, I have Larscis.
Hi there, folks.
And Starlight Ironhoof.
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you for joining me today. And just before we get started, I want to say to all our viewers to stick around after the scores because we have a special treat in store. So, as always, we'll start things off with a quick plot recap. In an effort to shed some light on the chest from the Tree of Harmony, Twilight travels to Celestia and Luna's old castle to search the library for information. Applejack, recalling a story from Granny Smith about the castle being haunted, leads Rainbow Dash there to settle a most daring pony competition. And Rarity and Fluttershy venture there as well, as Rarity wants to repair the castle's tapestries. Unaware of each other's presence, the groups run into each other, leading them to believe the castle truly is haunted, while we see another pony stalk them from the shadows. Events escalate and, accompanied by the playing of a pipe organ that shifts the castle around, get split up, leading to further tension that explodes into complete comedy when all four run into each other. Twilight investigates, putting an end to the fracas, and together they find out where the mysterious organ music was coming from. Did you know Pinkie can play the pipe organ? 'Cause she sure didn't. Closing things out, Twilight reflects on the events and brings up the idea of the group keeping a journal, an obvious replacement for the letters to Celestia. So, coming off the typical two-part season opener where we have more of an epic storyline, we're back to the fun, the simple stories, the comedic stories. So, general impressions. Larscis, what did you think of this episode?
I thought it was generally well written. It sort of harkens back to what I consider to be first season style, where we're still getting more exposition on these characters. And I generally think that they did a great job of presenting that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because Twilight's in the castle to find out about the chest from the Tree of Harmony, but that's not the focus of the episode. And the castle really isn't the focus either. The castle is more used as a haunted house backdrop. The focus of the episode is really the characters and their interactions, which we definitely saw a lot of in season 1.
So they've had this great location that they could have used for 3 seasons now, and we're finally getting back to it. And I can't wait to see what actually comes up next, because they did introduce a lot of locations within the location itself, didn't they?
Well, they certainly did, and I think that's because we only see it in the season premiere as a flashback. The characters don't enter the castle proper, and there was so much more going on in that episode that it didn't make sense for them to really explore the castle. And now, while they've introduced a lot of locations into the show that we really haven't revisited, like Appaloosa, given the proximity of the castle to the Tree of Harmony and how much that factors into this mystery that hopefully is going to span the season, I definitely can see them coming back here in another episode. Starlight, what did you think of the episode?
Well, I thought the episode was really well written. As Larscis was saying, it did kind of take me back to that season 1 feel. What I really liked about it was, as opposed to just a normal slice of life story around Ponyville, they did actually go on an adventure. I mean, it was a place they previously visited, but we haven't actually seen them in it since the series premiere. I know the season premiere they had a flashback there, but that didn't really explain any more of the old castle that Princess Celestia and Luna resided in. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about this episode was how it incorporated folklore into it. I've always really liked folklore inside of fantasy settings. That's why Sleepless in Ponyville is my favorite episode. It's just filled with folklore, but everything with the castle being haunted and the Pony of the Shadows. And also, they really did a lot more with world building, which I really appreciate, because the series had started to feel a little stale, like they had done everything they could, but now they're introducing new elements.
Well, no, that's definitely true, but we've seen before that they don't introduce something until there's a need for it. So it's kind of weird that the castle is right above the tree, but in the premiere, nobody knows about the tree. You'd think if anybody knew about the castle, he'd be, oh, by the ravine above that Tree of Harmony. But now all of a sudden, Applejack has stories from Granny Smith about the castle, and it's something you just almost have to push aside because it doesn't make sense if you try to put all the continuity together. Why Rarity would decide to go now instead of years ago, I mean, to explore the castle is a little off, but ultimately it's a location that didn't exist until they knew what they wanted to do with it, I suppose.
I know Lauren Faust has actually talked about that a lot, where they don't like to define things until they absolutely need to use it or have a need for it. So that is kind of a trick when writing television.
Or else they could fall into what I like to call Star Trek syndrome, where every week they just introduce a brand new location and a brand new thing, and we never see it again.
Which, as far as world building goes, I can actually see that being detrimental because while you're populating the world with a lot of elements, they only exist in isolation. And so you almost dilute the world because while you're adding to it, all the elements are less cohesive, so they don't feel like they're part of the same universe.
And speaking on that, in the previous seasons, they really tried to avoid doing continuity between episodes. They would have some continuity, but it would just be through small references. However, we already have a continuation off of the opening two-parter, and they've set it up at the end for more to happen.
Are you talking about the shadow at the end?
Yes.
Well, I don't really know if the pony at the end is real. On one hand, we are seeing a lot more continuity in these episodes, so it could be setting up something that's going to be revealed later, especially if they reuse the location. But on the other hand, it would fit with the lesson of the episode, and it could be intended for the viewer to think they're seeing things in the shadows as well.
Well, true, and that's possible. We won't know till next week. However, with the whole keys, that's something that's going to be present in every episode, I feel, this season, and that's something they really avoided doing in the previous seasons.
Well, we do see a bit of that. In episode 3 of season 1, Ticketmaster, they actually introduce the Grand Galloping Gala, which we don't see until the finale. They're introducing it so that there's some build up to the event, because otherwise, if they had just had the gala as the last episode and you hadn't heard of it before, it wouldn't be as effective, which I think is what happened with Star Sword: The Bearded's Book, because it was just in the premiere and the finale and nowhere in between, and it wasn't as effective because of it.
Of course, there were all the jokes about the name of that book, the Book of Four Shadows, for example.
Yes. Now, Starlight, you'd mentioned it's an adventure episode, and it definitely feels like that because you've got 4 different narratives unfolding at the same time and overlapping at different points, but it's weird because none of the reasons that the characters go to the castle feel very adventure-ish. Twilight is there to read books. Rarity is there to take tapestries back to get them repaired. I suppose the closest we get are Applejack and Rainbow Dash, who go there specifically because it's supposed to be haunted. But other than that, it really only ends up being an adventure by chance.
Well, yes, but this episode did present Twilight going there as part of her epic quest for the 6 keyholes.
Okay, oh yeah, that's true.
So even though not much happened, it wasn't like sitting there watching Snake Way and Dragon Ball Z. There was actual movement going on.
Her going to the library isn't the epic adventure. The reason for going to the library was the epic adventure.
So it was a continuation of an adventure, even though not much adventurous stuff happened in the episode.
Okay, no, fair point, fair point.
And let's face it, watching Twilight read a bunch of books on what to look for would probably not make for a very exciting episode.
I mean, ultimately, the reasons that they're there just have to be believable enough. The point is that they get in the castle and you get the dramatic irony kicking in, which brings the comedy. They don't know that anyone else is there, so they believe it to be haunted. And that really is, it's the point of the episode.
Yeah, and this is where I'll say that Twilight, for example, is actually very excited about all of these things because she's logical minded. She understands that it isn't haunted, it's that there's these secret compartments and secret buttons and, that pipe organ, for example.
Do you think that there's actually a reason for that pipe organ, or it just happens to be a pipe organ that moves the building around?
Maybe they like to remodel every century.
Maybe they like to remodel every movement.
Oh, that was terrible.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we've talked about this episode feeling like a season 1 episode instead of something completely new, because it's written by someone completely new, Josh Haber. This is his first episode writing for My Little Pony, and the consensus seems to be it really feels like, from a character point of view, going back to the roots of the series. And that's interesting. Do you guys have anything to say about that?
Well, I know that when I was watching it, I completely forgot that it was a writer's first episode, because as you were saying, everything just felt very natural in terms of what the characters would do, how they would react in scenes, the comedy and the wit, and all the timing with that. A lot of times with TV shows, you can usually tell when it's somebody's first episode because it just changes tones completely, but he really did a good job at keeping everything consistent.
Well, I think that's especially true given the fact that this isn't really an episode that focuses on one particular character. All of the characters really get showcased here, but none of them are off the mark, and that's impressive because I could see a writer having a favorite character or a character that they really get, but you've got an episode here where every character is featured and every character just feels spot on. Although I think Angel seems like a little less of a jerk here than he usually does.
Yeah, but he's sitting there happy with a bowl of carrots.
Yes, we'll go with Angel's a small child. Bribe them with snacks.
Snacks that come out of the floor.
Floor snacks.
As long as it's not on the floor for 5 seconds or longer.
I'm actually rewatching it in the background here, and I'm just seeing all these setups that I'm glad that they didn't do in the stereotypical way.
Such as?
There's a scene where a suit of armor falls on Rainbow Dash, and one of the stereotypical responses to that would be Rainbow Dash is now dressed in the suit of armor and is clomping around and scaring everyone.
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
And I'm glad that they just had Rainbow Dash run off scared from the armor falling on her. It feels more like Rainbow Dash and less like we're taking the stereotypical line and throwing Rainbow Dash into it.
Well, that's definitely one of the things that I think made this such an enjoyable episode. It's not an entirely new premise. It's a horror episode that becomes a comedy episode through the use of dramatic irony. And I think how it pulls it off is by not falling into the pitfalls, not falling into the Scooby-Doo-esque tropes.
Well, they didn't do the multi-doorway yakety sax approach, obviously.
Although they have done that in a previous episode, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, that was which episode was that again?
That was in Ticketmaster.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I think one of the big problems for the classic yakety sax scene here is that it is difficult to leverage the characters. Everybody's just running around, whereas when the characters run into each other here and the whole fracas starts off, they can each be doing something unique and something specific to that character and what their story was up until this point. Whether it's Applejack thinking she's seeing the Pony of Shadows, or Fluttershy thinking that Angel has just been crushed. The scene is funnier because it's tuned to the characters as opposed to just having them run around.
Yeah, and on top of that, what makes that scene work in things like Scooby-Doo is that the villain is joining in with them. So they're chasing the villain, and the villain's chasing them, and then there might be a walking potted plant or something. In this, there is no villain. The villain is their imagination.
It's hard to be running from your imagination, although that is, in a way, that is what happens.
Yeah, and Twilight being sort of the grounding element in this realizes logically that, it was mentioned earlier on that ghosts don't exist and that magic works on rules. So she logically understands that the castle can't be haunted based on those assumptions.
Well, yeah, that's exactly the attitude we would expect Twilight to take. I like that the cartoon is self-aware of all of these setups that it makes. When Rainbow Dash and Applejack are in the armor room, Applejack actually flat out says, "Do you think there's a room in this castle that isn't filled with terrifying things?" And it's a very, very good observation to make.
It does make you wonder what Celestia and Luna were up to in the castle back then.
Well, they actually mentioned that too at some point when Twilight's reading from the journal, that Celestia likes to hide behind the paintings and Luna likes the trapdoor slide. I like that scene because it fits with the lesson of the show, which is that there is an explanation for things.
Well, part of it could just be, secret passages that are meant to be shortcuts. I mean, you don't know how much they were inviting visitors in, and maybe a princess had to get across the castle quickly. Some of it could have even been for, say, defense if there is a raid.
And those uses would fit perfectly with the disconnect that the episode kind of mentions between what your imagination can make something out to be and what it likely actually is.
One of the things I want to call back to on this is the drastic improvements in animation since season one. For example, watching Rarity stitch one of the tapestries, you see the needle go in and it forms a new stitch every time.
Well, that was a great attention to detail, and we're certainly seeing a lot more of that in season 4. On a similar note, the tone of this episode really lends to a more cinematic style, and we certainly see that in a number of shots. When Applejack is telling this story about the Pony of Shadows, we have a nice rack focus between, her and Rainbow Dash. A couple shots of a Dutch tilt. We have negative space framing the shots, which it fits with the very atmospheric tone of the episode, and it's great to see them really capitalize on that here.
One thing that I noticed too is lately they've been using a lot more darker tones. The season premiere, it made sense for them to use a lot of dark tones with the Everfree Forest invading, but I am starting to wonder if they're intentionally trying to keep a darker tone for the overall season. This is, of course, something that we won't know until we've actually had more episodes under our belts to review, but it's kind of interesting the approach they're taking on that.
We had episodes like that in the past.
Right, but not back to back to back.
Well, that's true. A number of the episodes that come to mind are Bridal Gossip, Zagor's Introduction, and Luna Eclipsed. But it is interesting to see similar toned episodes back to back to back. Although this is more of a comedic episode, even if the setting is darker. It's almost taking the Giggle at the Ghosty song and expanding it to its own episode. I mean, you have Pinkie Pie, who turns out to be the pony that was following them in the shadows, and when her identity is revealed, the menacing organ playing turns into ballpark music. That just really fits kind of the theme of the episode, that things that you don't understand can seem scary, but when you shed some light on it, you find out that there's nothing really scary there. It turns out to be Pinkie Pie.
It's not what I'll call dark. It's darker than previous seasons, perhaps, but it's not particularly dark in my mind. What I like, though, is that the fact they're able to tone it in that way and yet keep the story itself lighthearted, as well as the writing, the dialogue, the interactions, and that sort of thing.
Well, and I think that their ability to do that is really what makes the episode work, because, again, it's about this disconnect between how things are being perceived in that environment and what the reality of the situation is. So I think if the episode was actually truly dark, the premise would fall apart. And speaking of writing, we should probably talk about the journal that will be replacing the letters to Celestia.
Dear Diary, today I ate this for lunch, and I had this for dinner, and I just met Brad. He's such a nice guy.
Starlight.
It's probably a good idea they didn't call it a diary, huh?
Yeah.
I could see people getting up in arms again saying that the show is going all girly. It's interesting this is happening in the third episode, because in the third episode of season 2, we had Twilight's letters to Celestia being replaced with the main 6 all writing letters. And that seemed more just opening opportunities for the writers, not being as limited by having Twilight write them all the time. Here it seems an extension of the growth of Twilight's character. The letters really were Twilight's friendship reports, and Twilight's understanding of friendship has made her princess. It would seem a little odd to have her sending in homework now.
Right, and I was joking about the diary thing. However, I do like the journal idea, because another way they could have gone about it was her friends writing letters to her, but that kind of sets that whole level of distinction hierarchy.
Yeah.
Which, while she is a princess, they made it very clear in Equestria Girls, which may or may not be canon, that part of being authority is being able to stand up next to your friends.
Also, Starlight, I'm glad that they're not going with the diary thing, especially the way you just presented, because I don't want to read their Twitter and Facebook posts on what they had for lunch. I'd rather it be something that's bigger than that.
Yeah, and the purpose of a journal is more scholarly. They're publicly accessible, so this isn't just a private diary.
I like that they're still continuing the lessons at the end, because for some viewers, it helps to have it spelled out directly for them. And I like that they don't break the fourth wall and have the characters talk directly to the viewers at the end. It's something that they integrate into the story, to the world. And I think that this change also introduces a nice concept, which is they're not just writing down things for their own sake. They're writing down this journal so that others can learn from them. And I think that that's something worthwhile as well, is the concept of learning so that others can learn from you.
Yeah, and also, as Starlight was saying, journals are for learning. You have the MIT Press journals, which are compilations, and you have the New England Journal of Medicine, and you have the Wall Street Journal. These are all scholarly and erudite materials, and keep in mind that what they are writing there is supposed to be for other ponies to be able to read and learn from.
Which Twilight states is her intention, that other ponies could learn from them the way that they learned from the Journal of Celestia and Luna, which is a little funny if you consider the fact that it was hidden in a secret room where nobody could get to it. So, before we start wrapping things up, there was a lot going on in this episode. So, were there any favorite scenes that you guys just want to point out or talk about for a bit?
Well, for me, this isn't necessarily a favorite moment in terms of any merit to the show, or the artistic direction even. But that scene where Rainbow Dash and Applejack are staring down each other covered in bees, I just had to smile and think of Nicolas Cage.
No, my.
Oh,
No,
wow.
not the bees, yes.
Yep.
Well, it was certainly a way to get people's attention after the intro. And after Twilight's bit, it helps to set the tone of the show as comedic, not serious. Because when you hear the phrase bee stare, you know exactly what type of episode you're in for. I was a little disappointed to find that they were wearing beekeeper suits, but that's imitatable behavior, so you can't fault them for playing it safe.
Even that whole scene, I do really like it because it shows Pinkie Pie with her nonsensical numbers and saying the numbers don't lie.
The Pinkie Pie logic, yes.
Just little doodles.
Well, do you think they went over the top with Pinkie, though, in this episode? Because they do explain how she ended up there. They show her ringing the school bell with her head, and she's certainly quite amped up as far as Pinkie goes, but I don't know. Do you think that it's over the top, or do you think that it kind of fits with her character still?
Well, Pinkie Pie now is my favorite pony, but I don't think it's over top at all because she used to be my least favorite because I always felt like she was over the top. You know, she just had a gag for everything. She would just suddenly be fully party suited up with balloons and party favors and such. I mean, this actually seemed a little more toned down from the Pinkie I remember from season 1.
It's scary to think about Pinkie ringing the school bell with her head and say that's toned down.
Yeah, but I mean, think back to like the episode Dragon Shy. Just how over the top Pinkie always was.
It's also an amusing thought in my mind to think that she has bee suits stashed all over town just in case of a preemptive bee stare.
Larscis, any favorite scenes?
My favorite scene was probably whenever she was reading the book and finding out about the Hall of Hooves and the organ to the outside. And Spike asks her, "What does that mean?" She says, "I have no idea." It shows that she still has that curiosity she's demonstrated since season 1.
Again, a classic example that Twilight is still Twilight. Like, she walks into the library and her face just lights up, and she can't hear what's going on, the organ playing and all that, because she's just engrossed in the book. And I think that it's more reassurance that her character really hasn't changed much.
Yeah, and on top of that, there were a lot of people who, after season 3, said, Twilight's ruined, they made her a princess, it's all going to be about Princess Twilight now, and this goes to show that even though she is a princess and has a horn and wings, she's still the same character that we've loved since the beginning.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, for me, I don't think it's one scene in particular as much as it is Rarity's deliveries overall. I like that the biggest scream out of her isn't from being scared. It's when she looks down and sees the torn tapestry in her hooves. And at the end, when the tapestry falls on her and she runs off sobbing, saying, "I was only trying to restore ancient art." And when the characters ask Fluttershy, "What are you doing here?" Rarity is sitting there, still with the tapestry hanging over her head. She just deadpans casually, "She's with me." I love the delivery. Getting down to final thoughts and scores, Larsis, what did you think?
Well, I think that with the overall feel of the episode, it's able to be dark while also being light and lighthearted and having all of that comedy in there. And it felt very much like a first season episode, captured some of that magic that got me into this show to begin with. And based on that, I have to give it a solid 4 out of 5.
Starlight?
All right, so we have a new writer coming on the show with Josh Haber, and even though this is his first episode with 3 full seasons of material behind it, all the characters were able to come off very natural feeling. He didn't do anything to really destroy the feel of Equestria and Everfree Forest, and even though there were a few hanging plot points in the episode, such as the star spiders that we didn't get any idea of beyond Spike being scared of them, he really did a great job of keeping everything tied together and self-contained within one episode. Yes, we got the point with the 6 keys, however, this episode it really stands on its own without having any prior knowledge of what's going on in the season. Overall, I give this episode a solid 4 out of 5.
Well, once again, I agree on a lot of the points you guys said, so I think I'll focus on more of the technical aspects for this episode. First and foremost, the background music. It's often overlooked, but especially in an episode like this where there's a lot of different tones throughout, it really helps, and there's some really nice new background music here that definitely benefits the episode. The other, again, being the fantastic visuals, taking simple scenes and putting them over the top. We have that nice rack focus when Applejack is telling the story. When Applejack is looking for Rainbow Dash, there's this shot where she's looking through the doorway that's framed by shadow. It has a bit of a Dutch tilt to it, and it's just a really well framed scene. We have some similar framing later on when the main six are looking for the organ player, and they're framed by windows in the foreground. Shots like this really fit the setting and the tone of the episode, and it just goes to show that they're really thinking about how these shots are laid out. It's a hilarious episode that looks great and sounds great, and the characters are spot on. I give this episode a 4 out of 5.
Ramble and Ebert give it 2 thumbs up.
Who's Ebert? Is that you or me?
I don't know. I'll be EUB Bert. How does that sound?
Sure. We never commented on that this was a Castlevania reference, possibly.
Oh, well, we just did.
I mean, the name of the episode is Castlemania, and there's the Pony of the Shadows. It's totally not a reference to Castlevania Lords of Shadow. Let's just face it.
Totally not. Totally not. Well, we have one more surprise here today. We had the opportunity after the episode aired to talk with the writer, Josh Haber. Josh, I'd like to thank you for joining us for the episode review. I had a lot of fun actually reading your live tweets during the episode, which I think a lot of people did. I don't know how many extra followers you gained, but...
I gained about 1,000.
Oh my god. Because I think Megan had commented regarding your live tweeting the episode.
Yeah, she mentioned something.
Yeah, I'd started following you around then, but it seems to have shot up a little bit with the episode.
It really did. I think about a week ago I had 400 and now I have 1,400.
Yeah. I think for good reason too, because the consensus from everybody that I talked to is that, you'd done a fantastic job with this episode. Everybody loves it. And more importantly, everybody has thought that your capture of the characters has just been spot on, and it doesn't feel like this is your first episode. It really feels like you've almost been writing this show from the beginning. I noticed on IMDb that you'd also worked on Kaijudo, which is another hub program.
It is.
So was there any chance that you were familiar with My Little Pony before you came on as a writer?
Well, I definitely knew about the show. But yeah, I hadn't really watched any episodes until until after I had interviewed and got the job. And honestly, Megan hired me strictly on a referral. I mean, she'd read some other samples of mine that I had, but she sort of took a chance on me, and and there's a process of sort of submitting your idea, your premise for the show, and then going through an outline, and then doing a first draft and a second draft. So she had plenty of opportunities to correct anything that I might have done wrong along the way. But she hedged her bets. But no, I really once I had gotten the job and started to sort of pitch ideas for the show, I then went through YouTube and just The great thing about My Little Pony is there's a ton of reference material everywhere
Mhm.
that I didn't have to worry about not being able to find an episode. So anytime I needed something, I still do it today actually. If I'm have something that I need to write, I just go, oh, let me do a Rarity cut and show me all the highlights of Rarity's best lines. And there's just a YouTube. Someone's done a video of that. It's really helpful.
Yeah, because the during the live tweet, you'd mentioned a few other things like scaring Fluttershy, Candy meet Baby. If you hadn't seen an episode before the interview process, then I must say you definitely did your homework because everybody has agreed that you capture the characters, Pinkie Pie Logic in particular.
She's fun.
There's some shots there that people absolutely love.
Well, thank you. I mean, I really appreciate the sentiment, and honestly, that's probably my thing. If I could say my biggest talent as a writer, it's being able to hear the voices of characters and just sort of being able to tune in on that. I will readily admit to tons of weaknesses on story structure and being able to sort of get through the acts efficiently. But I know what Rarity's going to say when Pinky says something, or what Spike how Spike will react to something that Twilight says. I just hear the voices in my head, and that's just something I've kind of always been able to do.
Oh, well, the characters aside, there is a lot of continuity between this episode and the series premiere with the investigation of the Tree of Harmony and also the replacement of the letters to Celestia with the idea of the characters keeping a journal, which is fitting with Twilight's development as a character. So I got to ask, because you mentioned, pitching ideas, was this ever intended more as a standalone episode, or was that kind of your intention to begin with? Or did you start writing it with potentially a list of points, maybe from Megan, that had to be integrated for this continuity with the episodes around it?
I don't remember specifically, but I can sort of talk in general. I know that Megan, her tendency, and I think what she prefers, is to have a large overarching story that connects all the episodes so that we're sort of building to something. And I know that from a Hasbro and Hub standpoint, they enjoy that too. I know that from a network standpoint, a lot of times they like standalone things because they can sort of air them anytime they want. It doesn't have to be in any kind of sequence or anything. But I think everyone in general really appreciates the kind of epic sweep that you get when you have a story that you can tell over a lot of different episodes. I know that was definitely something we talked about in the writers' room when we were pitching out stories. And given how this episode that I wrote connects to some of these things in the pilot, I think you can look forward to more of that kind of thing for the rest of the season.
That would definitely be something that people are going to look forward to. And I can see how, from a writing standpoint, if the episode is completely self-contained, it limits opportunities, because you can't really carry on these multi-episode arcs, even if it's not the focus of the story. And it also is bringing some continuity as well. For new viewers, I could see that potentially being a hurdle, but
Sure.
it also gives a reason to continue, because you're seeing something progress episode to episode, which for some shows like Lost or Game of Thrones, you can't necessarily drop an episode because they are very continuity based, I suppose.
Very serialized, yeah. But if you think back to shows like, say, like The X Files, there was always sort of a general sort of overarching thing for the season, but there are also self-contained episodes that told their own story within the context of that larger story, and I think that's sort of the sweet spot where you want to be, where you're always moving the larger story forward, but you're telling complete whole stories within each episode to do it.
Yeah, and I think especially when you're getting multiple seasons going, it gives that season a bit more of an identity, rather than some shows that kind of issue continuity completely, and then there's very little kind of differentiating, the fourth season from the 18th season.
Sure, sure, definitely. Although, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for shows that just concentrate on, their one episode and that's it. Like The Simpsons. It's like there's not really any kind of, they'll have callbacks to things, but it's really only for humor's sake, and they do it so well. I think there isn't anyone who doesn't appreciate their individual episodes, or feels like they're missing something because there isn't a a larger story going on. I think it's just sort of a it's almost like a genre. It's just it's a kind of storytelling.
Yeah, there's no right way to do it, and there's benefits to both. So, mentioning, kind of appreciating the single episodes, from your point of view, some of the things that you had commented in the live tweeting during the episode, including just how the episode turned out and being surprised by some of the things the animators had shown in. Would I gather that this is the first time you've actually seen the completed episode?
It is. It is. I've seen little snippets of things, but this is the first time I've seen it. Yeah.
Were you surprised by anything? I think one of the things you call out is the hash marks on the wall of the trap door room.
Honestly, at this point, I was thinking about that today because I remember tweeting it, thinking like, "Oh, the hash marks, DHX, you're awesome. That wasn't me at all." And now, like thinking back on it, because of course, in animation, there's a lot of lead time. I actually wrote this episode over a year ago, and I was thinking, "Gosh, you know what? Maybe I did think of that." But then I thought, you know what? I'm just being revisionist. Like it's clearly DHX probably did it, and I'm just trying to take credit for it. But I honestly don't even remember anymore, and that I think that's a credit to everyone who works on the show that it can be sort of such a seamless group effort.
Yeah, it seems every episode there's always a lot of really good visual things that are just added by the animators or the storyboarders, as well as all the great references and humor, and I'm assuming a lot of visual things that are written right into the script itself. Another one that you'd mentioned is the Hall of Hooves. You do that, the hashtag Beauty and the Beast. I'm guessing, going on a limb here, you're talking about the 1946 Jean Cocteau movie?
That's the one, and that I definitely wrote into the script because I'm constantly trying to come up with ways to describe the thing that I am imagining, and that's just what came out in my description. But a lot of times I will, because I tend to do that. I tend to write flowery description to to illustrate, verbally what I'm trying to go for. A lot of times I write a lot of needless stuff that the animators wisely sort of disregard and do their own thing on. Which is, it's part of the process. They have to be able to tell a story visually that the way they see it, and I kind of suggest things and am not at all dissatisfied when they don't show up. But this particular one, the Hall of Hooves, I think it was a good way to describe it and a great execution of it.
For sure. And that's, even back in season one, that's something that a lot of people were surprised by, was the fact that episodes were referencing not just pop culture elements, but musicals, and not even the musicals everybody's heard of, like Streetcar Named Desire, but a lot of musicals that, unless you watched a lot of musicals, you wouldn't be familiar with. And so I think that's something people are definitely keeping an eye out for in episodes. And I guess on that note, are there any other inspirations for this episode, whether they're, specific elements and scenes, or even just kind of thematic to the episode as a whole, that you had in mind when you were writing?
Oh, I mean, like I said, it's over a year ago, so I feel like I'm just going to end up taking a bunch of credit for stuff that wasn't mine. But definitely that Jean Cocteau Beauty and the Beast, definitely Scooby Doo, definitely Castlevania. But I mean, those are all sort of things that are pretty accessible. I don't think beyond that I can think of anything. Oh, one thing I definitely need to cop to is that bee joke at the beginning, most daringest ponies. That bee
Yes.
that's 100% Megan. That was Megan's joke from the beginning. I want to go on record saying that, because when people give you credit for something that you definitely know you didn't do, it makes you a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. No, I can see that. But that was a good scene, and I think a lot of people were like, that's imitatable right there. I guess they're wearing the suits.
Yeah, there's a division that you always answer to called standards and practices, which they always make sure that things appear safe, that you don't have characters playing with knives or needles or things, because it's a kids show and they don't want anyone going off and imitating that. So that was mandated by S&P, which was like, oh, okay, you can do the bee thing, but they got to be wearing beekeeper suits. Both Megan and I were like, well, kind of defeats the purpose, but okay, sure.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Scooby-Doo there, and one thing that we talk about in the rest of the review is the cliche scenes, like you never end up with one of the ponies ending up dressed in the armor that's kind of wandering around that is mistaken for a ghost, and you never have the multi-door hallway with the yakety sax and people running around. And was that a conscious effort to avoid those kind of tropes while writing?
Gosh, I mean, I don't. Yes, although even just hearing you mention it, I kind of miss not being able to put in the sort of multiple doorway Benny Hill music thing playing. I kind of wish I would have been able to get some of that in there. But it's like writing any sort of genre material. It's really not about, oh, I've seen this before. It's like, well, yeah, of course you've seen it before. It's a genre piece. It's about the execution, and can you do it in a way that is reminiscent of the original work or the trope and that people recognize, but also feels new and fresh.
Yeah, it's not derivative.
Yeah, you're always trying to do that whenever you write any kind. I mean, you say genre, but really every story's been told already. So we're always we're always walking in other people's footsteps.
Yeah, yeah. And now going back to, I guess the B scene would also fall under this category. It sort of sets the tone. It's very comedic at the outset. Every scene that you have seems to have some explanation or some connection to another point in the story, except for one. And that I know that a number of people were bothered by this as well and were wondering what was up with these. And it's interesting because of all of the elements that are frightening in the story, this is the only real tangible one. The rest are imagined, and that would be the star spiders. What is up with the star spiders?
You know what? I don't know. I don't remember writing that the star spiders were there. I might have. It also might have just been an animation choice. I don't think at the time that I was writing, I even knew what star spiders were. So it's one of those moments where the creators of the show are doing something because it feels right in the context of the scene, and then
Yeah.
the fandom, because they actually tend to know more about the show than the creators do, end up extrapolating from
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
So I think it was more just like, oh, it's a creepy moment. There should be spiders.
Yeah.
What are the spiders in our world? Oh, there's star spiders.
I think the thing that made it really stand out to people is they appear, but they're also referenced by the other characters before they even get to the castle.
Oh yes, you know what I did actually write that as a piece of dialogue, but I think at the time I think it was my first script, and I there were a lot of things about the show that I didn't know necessarily what they referenced or what the meaning was behind them, and I think that I had probably seen on YouTube a character mention them before, and it felt like this is what they would say in this moment.
Mhm.
And I mean, writers on shows fall into those traps all the time when they just write something that sounds right in the moment without realizing what the implications might be, what the larger implications might be.
Well, and not every element is this big mystery. Sometimes people start looking for these. But on that note, we also do have the shadow pony, or the shadow creature with the glowing eyes appears at the end of the episode. And I think there's going to be a lot of conjecture on that as well, because the theme of the episode is that scary things don't usually exist when you have some context, right? Your
Right.
imagination tends to go wild. And whether that was sort of a callback to the theme intended for the viewer, or that is actually an element that is for some reason going to continue on or is going to make an appearance in later episodes. It's part of the continuity that seems to be present in this episode. I don't know if that's something you can talk about or...
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to how things play out in future episodes,
Of course, of course.
but it definitely fits into that sort of Scooby Doo referential kind of paradigm, because you almost always had some sort of tag at the end of the show after those darn kids revealed that it was just Mr. Henry. There was always some sort of thing at the end, some sort of sting that was like, yes, it was all in their imagination, or was it? There always is that moment, and that, for me, that's a callback to those kind of moments that I remember being a kid and always thinking, because it adds this level of mystery, because it's nice to have the scary stuff explained away, and it's comforting, but it's also nice to know that there's still mystery out there, you know?
Exactly, exactly. I suppose a nice little softball one here would be, was there a favorite character of yours to write for this episode?
I mean, I, I think I've gone on record on Twitter already sort of saying I've always been sort of partial to Rarity. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why anyone wouldn't be partial to Rarity. I think she's great. She's one of those voices that I just hear so clearly in my head. I mean, in Pinkie Pie as well. It's just there's something about her voice that is just so specific, and it's so married to her character that it's just kind of fun to write. And Pinkie Pie is a lot the same way, but I understand why people might gravitate towards Pinkie Pie. So maybe the underdog lover in me is has to choose Rarity instead. But no, Rarity she's fun. I enjoy it, and it's also that kind of character where you think, oh, she's just a superficial bimbo or whatever. But I think it's sort of interesting to write that and to sort of find the areas where you can prove that not to be so.
Yeah. She had some great scenes in this. I love her reaction. The characters are screaming when something startles them. Rarity screams when she sees that the tapestry has been damaged.
Yeah, right.
It's completely in character for her there. So
yeah, like I said, she's a specific character. It's fun to write for. Enjoy it.
Well, I think that's all the questions I had. I don't know if there's anything else you kind of wanted to just kind of toss out there.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm just grateful. It's been such a pleasure, and the feedback has been so overwhelmingly positive. I think I've only read maybe one or two negative reviews, which of course I'm obsessing over. But
there's always going to be people that on both sides of the fence. It's the internet, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's sad, but it happens.
Of course. And I'm not saying that everything always needs to be positive, because I'm certainly open to people finding stuff that I didn't do well and that I need to do better next time, you know? I mean, that stuff is valuable too, for sure. But it always feels good to have people appreciate what you've done.
Well, I certainly hope, and it definitely sounds like people have been showing their appreciation, and for a good cause. This is an episode that everybody is loved, and I think it's going to be one of those bars that people are going to be kind of comparing other episodes to. So I think it might be the other writers that are going to be a little upset about comparisons to this episode.
Oh man, I hope not. It's just fun. I'm just saying.
It's not a contest or something.
Yeah, no. I think everybody has the things that they enjoy. This just happened to fit right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thanks again for joining us, and I hope that we have a chance to talk in the future.
I hope so. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I think that covers it for this episode. Larscis, since I have you here, I think I'll let you set up our review for the next episode.
Join us next week here on EFN Presents as we review Daring Don't.
Once again, for EFN Presents, I'm Ramble, and with me were Larscis.
Have a good time, folks.
And Starlight.
It was great chatting with you all. Good night.
Thanks for watching.